Here I am in my sleeping car at Dallas Union Station in the great state of Texas, about to head home to the great state of Rhode Island. I was in Plano for a corporate conference related to my day job, and rather than fly back like any reasonable person would do, I decided to take the train back instead and have a nice long ride. We just pulled out of the station. This is the northbound Texas Eagle. Although due to the funny route the tracks take, it was actually going south at the moment it passed through Dallas Station. We are headed to Chicago, where I will transfer to the Lakeshore Limited, which will get me as far as Boston, and then I can take a commuter train to Providence. The train I'm on now has 1 Genesis locomotive and 6 Superliner cars. I'm in the second car. Once upon a time, this was basically how everyone traveled. This was the only practical way to get from one end of the country to the other. Nowadays, in this country at least, overnight train travel serves a relatively niche customer base. Misfits like myself who prefer a slower pace of life and don't like leaving the ground, and for whom hopping between buses and hotels just doesn't appeal. I guess if we really wanted to be old-fashioned, we could travel by covered wagon. That would be fun. I'm traveling alone, but I guess if I was sharing this room with someone, this thing up here, I guess, is supposed to fold down. Not sure how it works. Oh, let's see. Oh, so it just comes down like this. Second bed. No need for that, though. Oh, great. Right. How do I get it back up? Oh, there it goes. Well, this is always awkward when your train has to stop in the middle of a crossing. See, one person's giving up and going the other way. Oh, nope.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, next station stop. About 45 minutes will be Longview, Texas. Longview, next stop, 45 minutes.
While I was at the conference in Plano, I found a piano at one of the office buildings, and I made good use of it. When I wasn't working, that is. However, to the best of my knowledge, Amtrak does not include pianos on their list of long-distance amenities, so I will have to go without practicing for a few days. Legend has it that when Paderewski was touring the US, he traveled in his own private train car with a full-size grand piano in it. Most pianists aren't so lucky. Some, such as Moritz Rosenthal, a pupil of Franz Liszt, traveled with a silent keyboard, which let him at least work on fingerings and practice some aspects of the physical choreography. There are also tales of other pianists like Arthur Rubinstein, who once memorized an entire concerto during the train trip to the concert. All he had was the score, and he practiced it in his lap without even the help of a silent keyboard. I don't know if I could pull that off. I'd probably be able to memorize notes, but actually being able to just walk off the train and sit down at the nearest piano and play it smoothly? Not so much. It's dinner time. We're given this thing called the flexible dining menu, which really ought to be called the inflexible dining menu because there are a pretty limited number of prepackaged meals to choose from. I wanted the salmon, but it seems they're out of it on this train, so instead I'm trying this thing with meatballs, which turned out to not have any meat in them. It's some sort of plant-derived protein. We happen to be stopped right now at some station, which makes it easier to relax while I'm eating. Time to hit the hay, I guess. Now, important question. If the train is going this way, then which way should I lie on this? I'm assuming that there's really almost no circumstance in which the train would suddenly accelerate, but it could suddenly decelerate, and if that happens, then it's probably better that my head be at this end. By the way, it turns out there was an extra mattress and bed sheets stored on the bunk above me. I hadn't realized this, and I just slept on the bare seat cushions in my day clothes. You live and you learn. We've got snow on the ground, so we're definitely further north this morning than when we started. Question is, where exactly? That's part of the fun of taking an overnight train. You wake up and you have no idea where you are. Well, if that arch there in the distance wasn't a dead giveaway, we are now approaching St. Louis Station. Over here, we've got one of Amtrak's newest locomotives, the Siemens Charger. Ooh, and they've got some of the new Venture coaches, too. Wonder when those will come to the Northeast. We're going to be here for a while. Let's go get some fresh air. Apparently, they just added an extra superliner coach to the end of this train, so now we're 7 cars. They announced it over the intercom when we arrived. I was hoping I could step off and get a video of it happening, but they wouldn't let us off until it was done. Over here is that other train with the new Venture coaches. And here's my train. There's a crew member there climbing back into the cab. However, the locomotive is still attached to that fuel truck. Once they untether the locomotive, then I better get back aboard. We are crossing the Mississippi here. I was trying to figure out whether all that stuff in the river was ice or trash, but I think it is ice flows. The engineering that went into the St. Louis Arch is pretty amazing. Apparently they had some pretty serious issues with thermal expansion because they were building it one side at a time and preparing to meet in the middle. But there was just enough difference in how much sunlight the two sides got that on the day of topping off, the anticipated gap between the two sides had shrunk by a few inches, and they had to spray one side with fire hoses to get it to cool down and widen the gap again. Naturally, the engineers would have preferred to do the topping off during the night when the temperature of the two sides had equalized, but hey, what's the fun in having a topping off ceremony when the public is asleep? While I was hanging around the station platform at St. Louis, I got to talking with a fellow passenger, and one of the things we talked about was model railroading, which her husband is big into and which I happen to know a thing or two about from back before college took over my life. It's a really fun hobby, especially when you get into not just collecting the trains themselves and trying to modify them to look hyper-realistic, but also doing all the scenery, all the trees and shrubbery and grassy hills and rocky mountains and farmhouses, office buildings. And the more you get into this, the more you start to pick up on every little detail that you see around you in day-to-day life. A rusty piece of junk in someone's front yard, a trash heap in the woods, a warehouse with one corner of the roof caved in, bird droppings on the sidewalk. Of course, you'd rather that the rusty bicycle half submerged by the riverbank not be there, but given that it is, you start to realize that it has some poetry to it. It tells a story, or at least suggests a handful of possible stories. By the way, this whole idea of every last detail telling a story, that applies to music too. When you're playing a piece of music, every little bit of ornamentation, every bass line or middle voice, every repeating accompanimental figure, you can make it tell a story. Or rather, it's going to tell a story whether you intend for it to or not. The question is whether it's saying what you want it to say as you play it. Lunchtime. Let's try one of the non-vegan options. This was listed on the menu as butter chicken, although butter isn't the predominant flavor I'm getting here. It's some sort of tomato curry, which is rather nice. We're getting pretty close to Chicago. There's the Sears Tower. Actually, it isn't the Sears Tower anymore. It got renamed the Willis Tower a couple decades ago, but folks still keep dead-naming the building. I'm going to be stuck here for close to 8 hours, so we'll take a break with this vlog and be right back after a word from our corporate sponsors. Oh wait, I don't have any. Well, after a very long layover in Chicago, very close to 8 hours, I am now safely aboard the Lakeshore Limited. When the boarding call came, I forgot to pull out my camera, so I didn't get a view of the train from outside. Hopefully along the way there will be stops that are long enough that I can step out and get some shots of it. But this is a very long train. It's about, I lost count, but it's a mix of Viewliner coaches, or sleeping cars, and Amfleet coaches. And it's going to split into 2 sections. One of them will go to New York and the other one will go to Boston, and I'm on the Boston section. Already, I gotta say these newer Viewliner sleepers are a big step up from the old Superliner equipment. Even though this is the economy roomette, it feels more spacious. I've even got my own private toilet, which is pretty sweet. More snow on the ground this morning. We've reached the upper left corner of Pennsylvania that touches Lake Erie. Although we can't see the lake right now, there's too much scenery in the way. You know, the advent of air travel really messed with our sense of just how tiny we are compared to the size of the Earth. I guess the internet messed with it even more because now you don't have to go outside of your house. But when you get on a plane, generally, you don't get to see much unless there's absolutely zero cloud cover, but often you're above the clouds, so you just go up, read a book, or snooze. When you're traveling on the ground, though, unless you do actually sleep for the whole trip, you're constantly reminded that, yes, you are actually traveling. You're traversing physical territory, instead of just being relocated from point A to point B, which is what flying ends up feeling like. I don't think I will ever not be unnerved by vacuum toilets, such as they use on modern train cars and airplanes. These things are just so sudden. Watch this. I was in an airport once, waiting for a connection flight, and I was overhearing this bunch of school kids, think 8 to 10 years old, and one of them, clearly trying to show off his worldly wisdom to the others, was talking about how airplane toilets are basically a giant vacuum, so if you sit down on it and you flush while you're sitting on it, you die. Okay, guys and gals, you see that vast expanse of white beyond the houses reaching up to the sky? That is Lake Erie in the winter. It's hard to see, but the surface is pretty rough. It reminds me of those stark paintings of ships stuck in the Arctic ice. Wouldn't it be cool to live in one of these houses right between a railroad and the shore of one of the Great Lakes? That's all? Come on, Amtrak, this is the Lake Shore Limited. I want a better view than that. Actually, it's New York Central's fault. They're the ones who built this route. Lunchtime, and this train does have the salmon, yay. Take a look around this Viewliner dining car. Pretty swanky, isn't it? Even though it's the exact same menu, the fact that the dining car itself is fancier helps you forget that the food is just pre-packaged. We're approaching Albany. Looking back, you can see just how long this train is. It's got to be a dozen cars at least. My car is right behind the locomotives. Crossing the Hudson River now. Some vintage Streamliner cars over here. The problem with trying to vlog a trip like this is that unless the train is going slow, when something interesting flashes by the window, I barely have time to whip out my camera before it's gone. We've reached Albany Station. Let's watch them split the train. Here's the far end. We're standing next to the dining car. Don't know where the train over here is going. But here's my train, and this is where the split will happen. Only the first 4 cars will be going to Boston. Dangerous job. For a second there, I was worried that the Boston section was going to leave without me, but I made it back on in time, and we haven't quite left Albany yet. I can't put my finger on it, but this feels more and more like New England. We're about to go into the State Line Tunnel under the Berkshires. When they split the train, the New York section got the dining car, and we got the crappy snack bar car. But they did take our dinner orders in advance so that they could make sure enough meals were aboard before leaving Albany. And then they brought dinner right to our sleeping compartments. I got the salmon again. Out of the 3 menu selections I tried, this one definitely wins. So this was my first overnight train trip. And I gotta say, it turned out to be everything my 10-year-old self always dreamed it would be. I don't know when I'll ever have the time to do this again, but I would totally recommend this to anyone. Because you never know what will happen to Amtrak in the future. And you know, it pains me to say this as a lifelong train enthusiast, but if I step back and look at it without my train enthusiast hat on, it is really hard to justify Amtrak in its present form. Medium-distance regional rail does pretty well in parts of the US, and I do think there's potential for more of that. But if they did privatize Amtrak, I'm less sanguine about the long-distance overnight routes surviving. But in that case, it would be up to you passengers to prove me wrong. Boston South Station, and there's an MBTA train to Providence leaving in like 10 minutes. Can we make it? I don't understand why they needed to keep both locomotives when they cut the train down to only 4 cars. We made it. Last glimpse of the train we just got off of. Here's the new Pawtucket Central Falls station, so we're back in Rhode Island now. And here we are, pulling into good old Providence Station. And from Providence to home, it's not that far. In the words of Samwise Gamgee, well, I'm back.